This week here in Michigan, in Midland actually, the American Legislative Exchange Council has been holding a regional tax and economic policy academy where state lawmakers and policy leaders from around the country have been talking about, economic issues. It wraps up today. Joining us to talk about what this gathering is all about and what they hope to accomplish, Jonathan Williams is ALEC president and chief economist and co-author of Rich States, Poor States, featured speaker at this week's Academy, and with us this morning on WKZO. Jonathan, good morning.
Well, good morning, Ken. Thanks for having me. It's great to be back in my home state of Michigan here.
Well, welcome back to Michigan. American Legislative Exchange Council, do you refer to it as ALEC?
That's right. Yes, we're really the nation's largest nonpartisan individual membership organization of state lawmakers who really believe in the key American principles of free markets and limited government and federalism. The idea that not all good ideas come from Washington, D.C. In fact, most don't. They come from the states. And one of the reasons why we're here is just talking about this inherent competition between states and what it means to be a successful state and what it means to, unfortunately, suffer the fate of states like Illinois and California that have gone down a very different path. And so we've got a group of lawmakers from quite a few states here in Michigan talking about those issues of freedom and lower taxes and how to become a more competitive state for themselves.
So you all co-authored a book, as we mentioned, called Rich States, Poor States. So where are we in this configuration, Jonathan?
Well, there's a couple of ways that we measure states, and one is economic outlook based on different policies that are in place. Michigan has fallen, unsurprisingly, I think, to you and your listeners in recent years, but still comes in at number 19 nationally. That is partly to do because of Michigan's relatively low flat tax on personal income and small businesses. I know there's some in Michigan that may want to go to the ballot to change that and try to create a progressive income tax that has really decimated states like California and New York that are hemorrhaging people and jobs to other states. And so that's a key element of why Michigan stays in the top half of states. But some of the surrounding states that we have here, for instance, Indiana, obviously not very far away from you and many of your listeners, and Indiana is number 3 now in the country for economic outlook. Ohio, a state that's represented here, also a state that has been gaining quite a bit on Michigan. As much as it pains me as a Michigander to say that, Ohio just enacted a 2.75% flat tax in their recent budget a few weeks ago and have become one of the lowest tax states in the Midwest now.
Jonathan Williams is our guest, president of the American Legislative Exchange Council, a regional tax and economic policy academy being held this week in Michigan. So did the topic of tariffs come up during this gathering, Jonathan?
We focus mostly on the state-based issues. I mean, obviously, when you're talking about the economy, tariffs and so many other things are part of that discussion. But we at ALEC focus mostly on what's in the purview of the 50 state capitals and their lawmakers. And obviously, a lot of lawmakers have very strong opinions on all sides of that tariff discussion, but it's not really something we focused a ton on because, there's so much that states can do directly to influence growth. I mean, lots of folks, think of Washington, D.C., and obviously D.C. is very powerful. It's very important that we extended the Trump tax cuts with the one big, beautiful bill. I think it avoided a national recession as a result of reenacting those tax cuts once again. But states have a whole lot of power and destiny, thankfully, to our American experiment with federalism, to be able to change laws and things like right to work and tax cuts and regulatory reform for themselves. And so those are the kind of policies we focused on this week.
As you get ready to wrap up the Academy gathering here in Michigan today, what's the action plan for what you've learned and what you've talked about on this occasion?
Well, I think, states realize that in the last several years, we've seen more than half the states dramatically cut their tax rates to become more competitive. They realize this dynamic of Americans voting with their feet away from high-tax states is only accelerating. And so we've talked a lot about the commonalities of states that are getting it right. So many of the states that are big inbound migration states are no income tax states, for instance, and right-to-work states. And so really doubling down on the things that work and coming up with proactive solutions for any state, regardless of who's in in charge of the legislature. We're honored to have Michigan Speaker Matt Hall with us here. He's been a great fighter, I know, for Michigan, trying to get things turned around, as is our good friend Eric Nesbitt, I know, down your way as well.
Should Michigan ditch the income tax or property tax, either one or both?
Well, I think it's just an incredible opportunity to look at ways to eliminate the income tax. Just this year, we've seen several states begin to phase out their income taxes to try to become more like Texas and Florida and Tennessee and the big growth states. Property taxes are a little bit more complicated just because it's so driven by local government spending decisions. And so there's got to be a really good comprehensive plan, I think, to tackle property taxes, strengthen things like the Headley Amendment, and ways to empower taxpayers to actually have a shot at understanding what's going on with their property tax bill. And that was a big focus of our discussion here as well.
Jonathan Williams, our guest, president and chief economist with the American Legislative Exchange Council, holding a regional tax and economic policy academy wrapping up today in Midland. Interesting stuff. Thanks for sharing with us this morning.
Well, thanks so much for having me.